What if the reason your legs feel heavy by the end of the day, or your feet won't warm up no matter how many socks you put on, has less to do with bad luck and more to do with what's been missing from your plate? Right now, millions of people live with cold feet, swollen ankles, tingling toes, and that dragging heavy leg feeling by evening. Most are told it's just part of getting older, and sometimes it is worth a real conversation with a doctor. If numbness, swelling, or leg pain shows up suddenly or won't go away, please get it checked out. But for a lot of people, day-to-day circulation is also deeply responsive to something simpler: food. Specific plant compounds can help your blood vessels relax and open within hours of eating them. Some of them work through a molecule your body already makes on its own: nitric oxide, a molecule so important to cardiovascular health that the scientists who discovered its role won the 1998 Nobel Prize in Medicine. And the foods that support it mostly cost less than $1. Stick around, because number 7 contains a compound researchers have studied specifically for its effect on that same pathway. And number 20 is a plant so woven into traditional heart care that herbalists were using it for failing circulation centuries before modern cardiology existed. If you want more videos like this, practical, plant-based, no-nonsense, hit subscribe now, because we post new ones every week here at Healthy Roots. Let's get into it. Here are 20 plants that support healthy leg and foot circulation, from solid everyday helpers to the one herb with the longest medical track record of them all. Number 1, beets. The nitric oxide starter. Let's start at the root, literally. Long before anyone had heard the words nitric oxide or vasodilation, healers across Eastern Europe treated beets as food for the blood, fed to the tired, the pale, the recovering. They didn't know the mechanism. They just noticed it worked. Modern research backs that instinct up. Beets are one of the richest dietary sources of nitrates, compounds your body converts step by step into nitric oxide, the signal that tells blood vessel walls to relax and widen. When vessels widen, blood moves more freely, all the way down to your feet. Several clinical studies have found that drinking beetroot juice can measurably lower blood pressure and improve blood flow to working muscles within a few hours, which is part why endurance athletes drink it before competition. Some research has even looked at improved time to exhaustion in trained cyclists after beetroot juice supplementation, which gives a rough sense of how quickly the nitrate pathway can respond. You don't need to juice beets daily to benefit. Roasted beets, beet salads, or beet powder stirred into water all supply the same raw material. Most of the studies showing a measurable effect use around 2 small beets or 8 ounces of juice. Beet greens, the leafy tops most people cut off and toss, are edible too, and they carry their own nitrate content along with iron and vitamin K. So if you're buying beets with the top still attached, it's worth sauteing them rather than discarding them. One caveat worth knowing: beets are high in oxalates, so if you have a history of kidney stones, it's worth talking to your doctor about how much beet juice makes sense for you specifically, since concentrated juice delivers oxalates in a more concentrated form than a roasted beet does. And don't be alarmed if your urine or stool takes on a reddish tint after a big serving. That's just Betalan pigment passing through, harmless, and actually a decent sign you ate enough to matter. Pickled beets, a jar pantry staple in a lot of old farmhouse kitchens, are another easy way to keep a ready supply on hand through the colder months. Beets got filed away as a holiday side dish, something you eat once a year and mostly avoid because it stains the cutting board. But for circulation, it's one of the most direct, low-cost places to start. Think of it as the fuel your blood vessels have been quietly asking for from the bottom of the produce aisle. Number 2, spinach. The leafy nitrate source spinach has fed people since ancient Persia, and it traveled through Arab trading routes into medieval Europe as a strengthening food for the anemic and the fatigued. What we now understand is that spinach is one of the most nitrate-dense vegetables you can eat. The Cleveland Clinic specifically notes that leafy greens like spinach, kale, and Swiss chard supply nitrates that support open, relaxed arteries, the same pathway beets work through. Your body converts the nitrates, vessels relax, and blood moves more easily to the small capillaries in your lower legs and feet, the ones that tend to suffer first when circulation slows. Here's something worth knowing. Cooking spinach actually concentrates its nitrate content, since the volume shrinks so much. A cup of cooked spinach delivers meaningfully more than a cup of raw. Sautéed spinach is a side, spinach folded into soup, or wilted spinach under eggs all count. If you're not a fan of cooked spinach on its own, blending it into a smoothie with fruit is a reasonable workaround, though you'll get a slightly lower nitrate dose than the cooked version. Frozen spinach is a fine substitute for fresh when you're short on time, and it's usually flash frozen close to harvest, which helps preserve its nitrate content reasonably well. Store-bought bagged spinach tends to lose some nitrate content the longer it sits in the fridge, so working through a bag within a few days of buying it, rather than letting it linger for a week, gets you closer to its full potential. A squeeze of lemon over cooked spinach also brightens a flavor enough to make it genuinely enjoyable rather than just something you push through. The practical target is simple. Build at least one meal a day around leafy greens as the base, not the garnish. Spinach quietly stopped being seen as medicine the moment we started thinking of vegetables as filler instead of function. It still does the same job it always did. Number 3, arugula, the underrated nitrate concentrate. Here's one that surprises people. Across studies measuring nitrate content in vegetables, arugula, the peppery green most people treat as a garnish or a fancy salad add-in, consistently ranks among the highest. Mediterranean cooking has used it for centuries, often raw, drizzled simply with olive oil, as an everyday food rather than novelty. Populations with long-standing arugula-heavy diets tend to show strong cardiovascular markers, something researchers increasingly connect to overall dietary nitrate intake rather than any single nutrient. The mechanism runs through the same nitric oxide pathway as beets and spinach, but because arugula's nitrate concentration is higher per gram, a smaller serving can do more work. Add it raw to salads, sandwiches, and wraps. Toss a handful into eggs right at the end of cooking, or use it as a post-baked pizza topping to keep the nitrates intact. It also pairs naturally with citrus, which is a nice bonus. A squeeze of orange or lemon over an arugula salad adds vitamin C on top of the nitrates, both relevant to vessel health through different pathways. Because arugula wilts fast, buying smaller amounts more often tend to work better than a big bag that goes slimy by day 3. If you have a bit of outdoor space, arugula is also one of the easiest greens to grow yourself. It germinates quickly, tolerates cooler weather better than most lettuces, and can be harvested continuously by snipping outer leaves rather than pulling the whole plant. So a small patch can keep a household stocked for weeks. Arugula gets overlooked partly because it's assertive, bitter, peppery, not built to be bland. But that bite is doing real work. Think of it as a small, sharp overachiever of the produce aisle. Number 4, garlic. The oldest documented vessel support no plant on this list has a longer medical paper trail than garlic. It shows up in ancient Egyptian medical texts, where workers building the pyramids reportedly received garlic rations to support their health and stamina, in Greek and Roman military provisions, and in Ayurvedic and traditional Chinese medicine. Nearly every culture that grew it found a use for it tied to the blood and heart. Garlic contains sulfur compounds, most notably allicin, which is only produced once the clove is crushed or chopped. Multiple clinical studies have found that garlic supplementation can modestly lower blood pressure and support arterial flexibility. And one of the more consistent findings is that garlic helps reduce platelet clumping, supporting smoother blood flow to the smaller vessels of the legs and feet rather than sluggish, thickened flow. For raw garlic, crush or chop it and let it sit about 10 minutes before eating or cooking, which give the allicin-forming reaction time to happen. Most of the supporting research use somewhere around 1 to 2 cloves a day. If raw garlic is too harsh for your stomach, lightly cooked garlic, add it toward the end of cooking rather than the beginning, so it isn't exposed to high heat for too long. Still retains a meaningful amount of allicin, just somewhat less than raw. Aged garlic extract, sold as a supplement, is another option that some people find gentler, and that has its own separate body of research behind it. If you're worried about the aftertaste, chewing a small piece of fresh parsley or a slice of apple afterward is an old, low-tech trick that helps neutralize it. Growing your own garlic is also fairly forgiving. A single clove planted in fall typically yields a full head by the following summer. Garlic got demoted to flavoring, something you toss in without thinking. But it's arguably the oldest vascular support food in recorded history, still doing the same job, still nearly free for anyone who grows it. Number 5, onions. The flavonoid partner to garlic, onions, and garlic have traveled together through nearly every food culture on Earth, and they complement each other well because they work through different mechanisms. Where garlic leans on sulfur compounds, onions lean on flavonoids, plant pigments concentrated especially in the outer layers and skins. The standout compound is quercetin, one of the most studied anti-inflammatory plant compounds in nutrition research, with documented effects on capillary wall integrity and vascular inflammation. For people whose circulation issues have an inflammatory component, which describes a lot of chronic cases, onions offer support right at the vessel wall level. The outer papery layers carry the highest concentration of these compounds, which is why old-fashioned cooks who toss whole onion skins into the stock pot and simmer them for hours were extracting real nutrition, even if they didn't know the chemistry behind it. Use onions as a daily cooking base, and when making stock or soup, toss the outer skins in and strain them out before serving. Red onions carry more quercetin than white or yellow varieties. Shallots and leeks, close relatives of the onion, carry some of the same flavonoid content and are worth rotating in for variety, especially if the sharpness of raw onion isn't your thing. Cooking onions low and slow, rather than blasting them on high heat, seems to preserve more of their flavonoid content, which is one more small argument for the old habit of a long, slow-cooked base. Storing onions in a cool, dark, well-ventilated spot rather than the fridge helps them keep their structure and flavor for months, which is part why root cellars and mesh bags hanging in a pantry were such a common sight in older households. It wasn't just about space. It was about preserving a genuinely useful staple. Onions became so common we stopped taking them seriously, but familiarity doesn't cancel out the biochemistry. Number 6, ginger. The warming root. Nearly every traditional medical system that encountered ginger noticed the same thing. It moves things. Ayurvedic medicine calls it a near-universal remedy. Traditional Chinese medicine uses it to warm the extremities and address what practitioners describe as cold stagnation, a concept that overlaps closely with what we now call poor peripheral circulation. Caribbean folk medicine used ginger tea specifically for cold feet and sluggish blood. The compounds responsible, gingerols and showgales, have measurable vasodilatory effects in research, helping vessels relax and open. Ginger also has mild antiplatelet activity, which may support smoother blood flow through smaller vessels. Several clinical studies support ginger's role in reducing inflammatory markers relevant to vascular health. For people with chronically cold hands and feet, the warming sensation isn't just psychological. Blood flow to the extremities genuinely appears to increase. The most traditional preparation is fresh ginger tea, a few slices of the root simmered in water for about 10 minutes. Fresh ginger added to cooking works too, and a warm ginger foot soak is an old, simple remedy for cold, tired feet. Dried ginger and fresh ginger aren't quite chemically identical. Dry and concentrate showgales relative to gingerols. So both forms have slightly different traditional uses, but either one is a reasonable everyday choice. If you're someone who runs cold most of the time, adding ginger to your routine in the colder months, rather than just when you're already feeling under the weather, tends to be how traditional users actually built the habit. Fresh ginger root also keeps remarkably well in the freezer, whole and unpeeled, which means you can grate off exactly what you need straight from frozen, without worrying about a piece going soft or moldy in the fridge before you get to it. Ginger got reduced to a stir-fry ingredient and a gingerbread flavor. It deserves better billing. Number 7, turmeric. The compound researchers are watching closely. This is the one I mentioned at the top. Turmeric has colored South Asian food and medicine for around 4,000 years, and its active compound, curcumin, is now one of the most heavily studied plant molecules in medical research. What keeps coming up is curcumin's relationship with nitric oxide production. Research suggests curcumin can activate an enzyme called endothelial nitric oxide synthase, or eNOS, the enzyme your blood vessel walls use to actually manufacture nitric oxide. More eNOS activity means more nitric oxide, which means more vasodilation, which means better blood flow reaching your toes. Some researchers have specifically pointed to curcumin as one of the more promising plant-based eNOS activators currently being studied, which is part why it's earned a place fairly high on this list. Traditional Ayurvedic medicine used turmeric for exactly the pattern we now associate with poor circulation, heaviness, swelling, sluggish blood flow in the limbs, long before the biochemistry was understood. Practically, curcumin is poorly absorbed on its own. Black pepper's piperine dramatically boosts absorption, so the two are traditionally combined, cooked together, or taken together as a supplement. A bit of fat also helps absorption, which is part why golden milk, turmeric, black pepper, a fat like coconut oil, sometimes honey, became the classic preparation. If you'd rather not cook with it daily, turmeric supplements that already include piperine are widely available and take the absorption question off your plate entirely. Just check with a doctor first if you're on blood thinners, since curcumin can have mild blood-thinning properties of its own at higher supplemental doses. Fresh turmeric root, when you can find it, has a brighter, slightly citrusy flavor compared to the dried powder, and grating a small amount into a stir-fry or soup is an easy way to work in without committing to golden milk every day. One practical heads up. Turmeric stains everything it touches, from cutting boards to fingertips to countertops, so it's worth working on a surface you don't mind marking up or wearing a glove if you're handling the fresh root in any real quantity. Turmeric spent a while as a trendy Instagram spice. The research underneath it is a lot more substantial than the trend cycle suggested. Number 8, Cayenne Pepper, the circulatory stimulant. If you've ever eaten something spicy and felt warmth spread through your body, you felt roughly what cayenne does to blood vessels. Traditional herbalism across Central America, The Caribbean and the American South use cayenne specifically for cold extremities and sluggish circulation, describing it as a stimulant in the sense of activating the circulatory system rather than the nervous system. The active compound, capsaicin, triggers receptors in blood vessel walls that promote vasodilation, and research also links it to reduce platelet aggregation, which may support easier flow through smaller peripheral vessels. People with Raynaud's-type cold extremity symptoms have used cayenne traditionally, though anyone with a diagnosed vascular condition should treat this as a food, not a treatment plan, and check with doctor first. Practically, start small, a pinch in eggs, soup, or stew, and build tolerance gradually. Some traditional preparations infuse cayenne into apple cider vinegar for a more concentrated dose. Interestingly, topical capsaicin creams are FDA approved for pain relief through a related mechanism, which says something about how seriously the compound is taken outside the spice rack. Cayenne comes in a wide range of heat levels, so if a full teaspoon feels like too much too soon, starting with milder chili powder and working your way toward pure cayenne over a few weeks is a perfectly reasonable approach. It's also worth noting that capsaicin can irritate an already sensitive stomach or aggravate acid reflux for some people. So if that's you, smaller amounts spread across the day tend to sit better than one large dose. Growing your own cayenne peppers is genuinely satisfying if you have a sunny spot for a pot or a garden bed, and dry and seasoned harvest into your own homemade powder means you know exactly how fresh and potent it is, unlike a jar that's been sitting on a store shelf for who knows how long. Think of cayenne as a gentle nudge to a sluggish system, not a fire hose. Number 9. Pomegranate. The ancient fruit with two mechanisms, pomegranate, shows up in Egyptian, Greek, Persian, and Hebrew texts as a symbol of vitality, and traditional Ayurvedic and Unani medicine use it specifically for heart and vessel support. It turns out to work through two separate mechanisms at once. It's one of the most polyphenol-dense fruits commonly eaten, and polyphenol help protect the endothelium, the delicate inner lining of blood vessels, from oxidative damage, one of the key drivers of vessel stiffening over time. It also contains meaningful dietary nitrates, feeding the same nitric oxide pathway as beets and leafy greens. Several clinical studies link regular pomegranate juice intake to measurable improvements in blood flow and reductions in arterial stiffness, and some of that research has specifically measured improved oxygen delivery to muscle tissue during exercise, which is a reasonably direct proxy for how well blood is actually reaching the extremities. One frequently cited study followed people drinking pomegranate juice daily for a year and found evidence of reduced carotid artery thickening, a meaningful finding, though it's one study in one population and shouldn't be read as a guarantee for everyone. Practically, fresh arrows are the most whole food option, and unsweetened 100% pomegranate juice delivers a more concentrated dose if you prefer it. Deasting a whole pomegranate takes a bit of practice. Scoring the rind into quarters and breaking apart underwater keeps the juice from staining your kitchen and makes the seeds easier to separate from pith. If fresh pomegranates aren't in season where you are, frozen arrows are a decent substitute and hold on to most of the polyphenol content. A whole pomegranate also keeps remarkably well at room temperature for weeks, and even longer refrigerated, which made a practical winter fruit for households long before refrigeration existed. One more reason it shows up so consistently across ancient cold season food traditions rather than just warm climate ones. Pomegranate became a flavor in sparkling drinks and salad dressings. Its older reputation as a vessel-supporting fruit has real research behind it now. Number 10. Blueberries. The endothelial protectors long before blueberries became a smoothie staple. Indigenous peoples across North America used wild blueberries and close relatives as part of a broader diet supporting general vitality and reducing inflammation. The compounds responsible are anthocyanins, the deep blue-purple pigments, which are among the most studied vascular protective compounds in the plant world. Anthocyanins appear to improve endothelial function, the inner vessel lining's ability to produce nitric oxide on demand. A healthy endothelium makes nitric oxide freely, an inflamed, damaged one struggles to. Supporting that lining with anthocyanin-rich foods is one of the more consistent findings in vascular nutrition research. Practically, eat blueberries regularly, fresh in season, frozen the rest of the year, since freezing at peak ripeness preserves most of the anthocyanin content. Wild blueberries, smaller and darker than the cultivated kind, tend to carry a higher anthocyanin concentration, if you can find them. A cup a day is a reasonable everyday target based on the amounts used in most of the supporting studies, and there's no real need to overthink the exact number. Consistency matters more than precision here. Pairing blueberries with a source of healthy fat, like a spoonful of nut butter or some plain yogurt, may modestly help with absorption of the fat-soluble compounds alongside the water-soluble anthocyanins. Buying frozen in bulk during peak season, when prices drop and quality is highest, is a simple way to stock a freezer through the winter months without relying on out-of-season fresh berries that were picked early and shipped long distances, often at the cost of flavor and nutrient density. Blueberries became a yogurt topping and a smoothie add-in, which isn't wrong, just incomplete. Think of each handful as ongoing maintenance for the inside of your vessel walls. If you made it to number 10, I want to say something honestly. None of this is a substitute for medical care, especially if your symptoms are new, sudden, or getting worse. Please talk to a doctor about those. But for everyday garden variety circulation support, food really does matter more than most of us were taught, and it's genuinely encouraging how much it comes down to ingredients that already exist in a normal grocery store, rather than anything exotic or expensive. A lot of what we've covered so far shares the same underlying thread: dietary nitrates and antioxidant plant pigments, feeding the same handful of biological pathways from slightly different angles. And that overlap is actually good news, because it means small changes across several foods add up rather than needing one perfect silver bullet ingredient. If this is useful, hit like so it reaches more people who could use it. And if you're not subscribed to Healthy Roots yet, now's a good time. We go deeper into practical, plant-based health knowledge every week. Let's finish the list, because the second half brings in some different mechanisms entirely. Number 11, blackberries. The hedgerow fruit blackberries grew wild along field edges and forest margins across Europe, and folk medicine there used them for sore throats, general inflammation, and as a late summer blood tonic. Generations of people ate them fresh in season and preserved them for winter without knowing the word anthocyanin. They just noticed that regular use seemed to help. Like blueberries, blackberries are rich in anthocyanins concentrated in their dark skin, supporting endothelial integrity and helping tamp down vascular inflammation. They're also a solid source of vitamin C, which is required for collagen synthesis, the structural protein that keeps vessel walls elastic rather than stiff and brittle. That's a two-pronged benefit: antioxidant protection plus structural support. Practically, fresh blackberries in season are excellent eaten plain or added to yogurt or oats. Frozen ones work year-round with minimal nutrient loss. Dried blackberry leaf tea was a traditional folk preparation for inflammation, high in tannins and antioxidants, though the research on leaf tea specifically is thinner than on the berries themselves. If you're growing your own, blackberry canes are famously easy to establish and famously hard to get rid of once they take hold, which at least means a steady, nearly maintenance-free supply once they're going. Combining blackberries with other berries in a mixed bowl is a simple way to get a broader range of polyphenol than relying on just one variety. If you do end up with more than you can eat fresh, they freeze well on a tray before being transferred to a bag, which keeps them from clumping into a solid block and makes it easy to pull out just a handful at a time later in the year. Blackberries mostly show up as a hiking snack or a pint container in July. For your vessels, they're closer to a small daily repair crew. Number 12, strawberries. The collagen builder strawberries work through a slightly different angle than the other berries, and it's a particularly relevant one. Wild strawberries were used in both European and Native American traditional medicine, often as a spring tonic after a winter of preserved food. The connection is vitamin C. Strawberries are unusually high in it, delivering more per cup than an orange. Vitamin C is a required cofactor for the enzyme that builds collagen in vessel walls. Without enough of it, vessel walls gradually lose elasticity and become more fragile. The extreme version of this is scurvy, where severe vitamin C deficiency causes vessels to actually break down. Most people today aren't anywhere near that severe, but a chronically low intake can still contribute to stiffer, less responsive vessels over time. Strawberries also carry polyphenol with their own mild anti-inflammatory effects on the endothelium. Practically, eat them fresh in season when possible, and know that frozen strawberries retain most of their vitamin C, so they're a reasonable year-round option. Because vitamin C is water-soluble and your body doesn't store much of it, spreading intake across the week rather than eating a huge bowl once and then none for days tends to be more useful for keeping collagen synthesis running steadily. Locally grown, in-season strawberries generally have a noticeably higher nutrient density than the pale, out-of-season kind shipped long distances. So if you have access to a farmer's market in summer, that's the better source. Strawberries are also one of the easier fruits to grow in a small backyard bed or even containers on a patio. And picking them fully ripe off the plant, rather than a few days early for shipping, makes a genuinely noticeable difference in both flavor and vitamin C content. Strawberries got filed under dessert. For vessel structure, they're closer to daily maintenance material. Number 13, oranges. The citrus flexibility support citrus has a long reputation in traditional medicine for vitality and warmth. Orange peel is still used as a distinct medicinal ingredient in traditional Chinese medicine, and citrus more broadly carried strong associations with vitality in Mediterranean tradition. Oranges deliver vitamin C, useful for the same collagen support reasons as strawberries, but their more specific circulatory benefit comes from a flavonoid called hesperidin, concentrated in the fruit and especially the pith and peel. Research on hesperidin has focused specifically on arterial flexibility and peripheral blood flow, with some studies looking at people with chronic venous insufficiency, a condition where blood pools in the lower legs, causing heaviness and swelling, finding modest improvement with citrus flavonoid intake, including some reports of reduced ankle swelling after consistent use over several weeks. Practically, eating the whole orange rather than drinking juice preserves the fiber and a fuller flavonoid profile, since juicing and processing strip much of it out. Organic orange zest added to cooking is a simple way to use the peel, where a lot of the flavonoid content concentrates. Blood oranges and other pigmented varieties carry anthocyanins on top of the standard citrus flavonoids, so rotating them in when they're in season adds a bit of extra variety. If you do drink orange juice cloudy, unfiltered, pulp-heavy juice retains more of the peel-adjacent compounds than the clear, heavily filtered kind, though it still won't match eating the whole fruit. Clementines and other easy peel varieties are a good option if the effort of segmenting a regular orange is what's keeping you from eating one daily. Lower friction usually beats a marginally better nutrient profile if it means you'll actually reach for the fruit consistently. Oranges became a breakfast juice carton. The whole fruit, pith and all, is doing more work than the juice ever could. Number 14, grapefruit. The bitter flavonoid-sourced grapefruit is a relatively recent citrus hybrid. First documented in 18th century Barbados, but it was quickly folded into Caribbean and American folk medicine for its bitter, stimulating qualities. That bitterness is functionally significant. Bitter compounds are traditionally associated with digestive and circulatory stimulation across many herbal systems. Grapefruit contains naringenin and naringin, flavonoids fairly specific to grapefruit, with research suggesting they can support endothelial function and reduce vascular inflammation, and some animal research has even looked at naringin's effects on lipid metabolism, suggesting a possible secondary benefit for overall cardiovascular health beyond circulation alone. Pink and red varieties also carry lycopene, the same vasoprotective antioxidant found in tomatoes. One important note: grapefruit contains furanocoumarins that interfere with an enzyme, CYP3A4, responsible for metabolizing a range of common prescription drugs, statins, certain blood pressure medications, and some blood thinners among them. If you're on any of those, talk to your doctor before making grapefruit a regular habit. This is a real interaction, not folklore. For everyone else, half a grapefruit with breakfast or grapefruit segments in a salad is a practical approach, and try to resist drowning the bitterness in sugar, since that bitterness is doing some of the work. If you're unsure whether a medication you're taking interacts with grapefruit, your pharmacist can usually answer that faster than searching around online, and it's worth a 2-minute conversation before making grapefruit a daily habit. Pomelo, a grapefruit relative, has a milder interaction profile and a similar flavonoid content, and it's sometimes suggested as an alternative for people who need to avoid grapefruit specifically. Storing grapefruit at room temperature for a few days before eating tends to bring out more sweetness, without losing much nutritional value, which can help with the raw bitterness, is what's been keeping you from making it a regular habit. Grapefruit became a diet food cliché. The chemistry underneath it is more interesting than that reputation suggests. Number 15, grapes. The polyphenol-rich vine fruit grapes are among the oldest cultivated plants in human history, and across Mediterranean traditions, the whole plant, fruit, leaves, seeds, was used for inflammatory conditions and general blood health. Wine culture accidentally preserved some of this, since red wine's polyphenol come from grape skins, though alcohol itself is a vascular stressor and isn't the delivery method being recommended here. The compounds of interest are resveratrol and proanthocyanidins, concentrated in grape skins and seeds, both studied for genuine effects on vascular health, supporting endothelial function, reducing oxidative stress in vessel walls, and helping maintain the small capillaries and venules most responsible for circulation in the lower legs and feet. Grape seed extract, which concentrates the proanthocyanidins, has been studied specifically for chronic venous insufficiency and lower leg swelling, making it one of the more targeted applications on this list. Practically, eating whole grapes with seeds, or simply chewing the seeds rather than discarding them, delivers far more of these compounds than the flesh alone. Darker varieties tend to carry higher polyphenol levels. Concord and muscadine grapes, less common in most grocery stores than standard table grapes, tend to carry higher polyphenol concentrations and are worth seeking out at a farmer's market if you come across them. Grape seed extract capsules are a reasonable option for anyone who simply doesn't enjoy the texture of chewing seeds. And the dosing on most standardized extracts is based directly on the studies looking at venous insufficiency. Freezing whole grapes is another simple habit worth building. They make a genuinely satisfying cold snack in warmer months, and freezing doesn't appear to meaningfully degrade the polyphenol content sitting in the skins. Grapes became snack food and raisins. The skin and seeds are where the real vascular support lives. Number 16, tomatoes. The lycopene defense tomatoes arrived in Europe from the Americas in the 16th century and were fully absorbed into Mediterranean cooking within a couple of generations. Their standout compound is lycopene, the red pigment, which is a strong antioxidant with particular affinity for cardiovascular tissue. Epidemiological research consistently links higher lycopene intake with better vascular markers, largely because it helps protect vessel walls from the oxidative damage that contributes to stiffness and inflammation. Here's the useful counterintuitive detail. Cooking tomatoes actually increases how much lycopene your body can absorb. Raw tomato lycopene is bound in a form that's poorly available. Cooking, especially with a bit of fat, breaks it down into a more usable form. That means slow-simmered tomato sauce, roasted tomatoes, and tomato soup are, if anything, more useful here than a fresh tomato slice in salad. Practically, cook tomatoes regularly, keep good quality tomato paste on hand as a concentrated lycopene source, and roast tomatoes in olive oil when you can. Sun-dried tomatoes are another concentrated source worth keeping in the pantry, since the drying process concentrates lycopene the same way cooking does. If you're growing your own tomatoes, letting them ripen fully on the vine before picking tends to produce a higher lycopene content than tomatoes picked green and ripened afterward, which is one more small argument for a backyard patch if you have the space for one. Canned tomatoes, often overlooked as a lesser option, are actually a perfectly good year-round source, since they're typically processed at peak ripeness, and the canning process itself involves a kind of heat that helps release lycopene. Tomatoes became ketchup and sugary pizza sauce. Slow-cooked tomato sauce, made simply, is closer to what the research is actually pointing at. Number 17, watermelon. The citrulline-sourced watermelon reads as pure summer indulgence, but holds a genuinely interesting distinction. It's the richest known dietary source of an amino acid called citrulline, first isolated from the fruit and named after it. Citrulline matters here because your body converts it into arginine, and arginine is a direct raw material your blood vessel walls use to manufacture nitric oxide. More citrulline can mean more arginine, which can mean more nitric oxide production and better vasodilation. Several studies on watermelon extract and citrulline supplementation have found reductions in blood pressure and improvements in arterial function, with some research specifically noting improvements in aortic stiffness, a marker of how flexible the body's largest blood vessel is under pressure. What most people don't know is that the white rind actually carries a higher citrulline concentration than the red flesh. Some estimates put it 2 to 3 times higher. Traditional pickled watermelon rind, once a common way to avoid waste, was inadvertently a good source of it. Practically, eat watermelon through its season, and if you're blending it, include some of the white rind along with the flesh for a bigger citrulline dose. Outside of watermelon season, citrulline supplements are available and reasonably well studied for blood pressure support. Because the rind has a mild, slightly bitter flavor on its own, blending it with a sweeter red flesh and maybe a bit of lime and mint makes a more palatable juice than trying to eat the rind plain. Watermelon's high water content also makes it a genuinely good hot weather hydration food, which matters for circulation too, since dehydration thickens blood and makes it harder to move efficiently through smaller vessels. Choosing a watermelon with a creamy yellow spot on the underside, where it rests on the ground while ripening, is a simple old-fashioned trick for picking one that's actually ripe rather than guessing from the outside alone. Watermelon became a seed-spitting meme. Underneath that, it's one of the more direct food sources for the nitric oxide pathway on this whole list. Number 18, celery. The underrated stalk celery might be the most underestimated vegetable in the produce section. Sold as diet food, bought with good intentions, and mostly left to go limp in the crisper drawer. That's a missed opportunity. Celery carries a meaningful dietary nitrate content, feeding the same pathway as beets and leafy greens, and it's also a solid source of potassium, a mineral directly involved in blood pressure regulation and vascular tone. Its high water content contributes to healthy blood volume and fluid balance, both relevant to circulation. Traditional Chinese medicine used celery and celery seeds specifically for conditions involving excess heat and constriction, language that maps loosely onto high blood pressure and restrictive flow. Modern research has looked at phthalates, compounds in celery that may help relax smooth muscle and artery walls. Most of the strongest evidence so far comes from animal studies, with human research still developing. So it's reasonable to treat this as promising rather than settled. Celery seed extract, a more concentrated form, has been used in some small human trials looking at blood pressure specifically, with encouraging but not yet conclusive results. Practically, eat celery regularly, raw, juiced, or cooked into soups where the liquid retains the nutrients, and don't toss the leaves, which carry a higher concentration of several beneficial compounds than the stalks do. Celery juice had a viral moment online with some fairly exaggerated claims attached to it, and it's worth separating the hype from the underlying reality. Celery is a genuinely useful, nitrate-containing vegetable, but it isn't a cure-all, and whole celery with its fiber intact is at least as reasonable a choice as juicing it. Buying a whole bunch and actually planning 2 or 3 uses for it across the week. Soup, a stir-fry, a snack with hummus, tends to solve the goes limp in the fridge problem better than buying it with vague intentions. Standing the stalks upright in a jar of water in the fridge, rather than leaving them loose in the crisper drawer, noticeably extends how long celery stays crisp, sometimes by a couple of extra weeks. Celery deserves to be more than a garnish for a Bloody Mary. Number 19, parsley. The herb doing more than decorating parsley has suffered one of the more absurd emotions in food history. A genuinely useful herb in Greek, Roman, and Middle Eastern traditional medicine, reduced to a garnished sprig people push to the side of the plate. It carries meaningful dietary nitrates when eaten in real quantity rather than as decoration, along with one of the higher vitamin C concentrations of any common herb, supporting the same collagen pathway relevant to strawberries and oranges. It also contains flavonoids like apigenin and luteolin, both studied for anti-inflammatory and vascular protective effects. Traditional Greek medicine used parsley as a mild diuretic and kidney tonic, supporting fluid balance, directly relevant to swelling in ankles and lower legs that often accompanies poor circulation. Practically, the dose matters here more than almost anything else on this list. A garnished sprig delivers essentially nothing. Tabbouleh, where parsley is the main ingredient rather than an afterthought, is a genuinely useful model. Aim for a couple tablespoons or more fresh parsley a day, folded into salads, eggs, soups, or steeped as a simple tea. Flat leaf or Italian, parsley tends to have a slightly stronger flavor and is a bit easier to chop in quantity than the curly variety, which is worth knowing if you're planning to use it as an actual ingredient rather than a garnish. It's also inexpensive and easy to grow in a small pot on a windowsill, which makes it one of the more accessible items on this whole list if fresh herbs at the store feel like an unnecessary expense. Freezing chopped parsley in ice cube trays with a little water or olive oil is an easy way to always have some on hand. So a lack of fresh herbs in the fridge is never really an excuse to skip it. It's a small, cheap habit that most people are drastically underdosing. Number 20, Hawthorn. The traditional heart herb this is the one I save for last, because it's doing something different from everything else on this list. Hawthorn, from the genus Crataegus, has been the most consistently used heart plant in European herbal medicine for at least 1,000 years. Medieval herbalists used it for heart weakness and failing circulation, and by the 19th century, physicians in Ireland and the United States were incorporated into treatment for what they call cardiac dropsy, an older term for the heart-related fluid buildup, and leg swelling that still affects people today. What's notable is that Hawthorn survived the transition into modern pharmacology largely intact. It's one of the few traditional herbal remedies that's still commonly prescribed by physicians in parts of Europe today, rather than being pushed entirely to the margins of alternative medicine. This isn't just folklore. Hawthorn has a genuinely substantial body of modern clinical research behind it, including multiple randomized controlled trials looking at its cardiovascular effects. It contains oligomeric proanthocyanidins, related to the compounds in grape seeds, along with vitexin and other flavonoids, and research links it to improve coronary and peripheral blood flow, reduce vascular resistance, and support for endothelial function. For leg and foot circulation specifically, easing vascular resistance can reduce the workload on the heart in pushing blood out to the extremities. Traditionally, Hawthorn was used as a long-term tonic, taken consistently over months, not as a short fix. Here's the important caveat. Hawthorn can interact with cardiac medications, including digoxin and beta blockers, and may affect bleeding time. If you're on any heart or blood pressure medication, please talk to your doctor before adding Hawthorn. This is one where that conversation genuinely matters. For people not on those medications, Hawthorn berries can be eaten fresh, made into tea by simmering for about 20 minutes, or taken as a standardized extract. If you decide to try a standardized extract, look for one that lists its proanthocyanidin or flavonoid content on the label, since Hawthorn products vary quite a bit in concentration and quality. Hawthorn shrubs are also fairly easy to grow if you have space in a garden or hedgerow, producing small red berries in autumn that can be harvested and dried for tea, much the way they were traditionally gathered from wild hedges across the English and European countryside. And if you do have a diagnosed heart condition, this is a good example of something to bring up proactively with your cardiologist rather than adding quietly on your own, simply because the interaction profile is real and worth managing with someone who knows your full medication list. It's a fitting place to end, because while everything else on this list works by supplying raw materials, nitrates, antioxidants, vitamin C, Hawthorn works more directly on the heart and vessels themselves, the way a tonic rather than a fuel source does. So there you have it, 20 plants, 20 ways your everyday food choices can support the circulation reaching your legs and feet, starting with your next meal. None of these are exotic. None require a prescription. Most are already in your grocery store, and a few might be growing in your yard. What's actually rare is in the plants. It's a habit of reaching for them consistently, day after day, instead of only when something already feels wrong. I want to be honest about the limits here too, because I'd rather you trust this channel than feel oversold to. Food can meaningfully support circulation, and for a lot of people, everyday symptoms like cold feet or a bit of evening swelling really do respond to consistent dietary changes over a few weeks. But food isn't a replacement for medical care, and it can't fix every cause of poor circulation. Some causes need diagnosis and treatment that a plant, however well-studied, simply can't provide. If you're dealing with numbness, swelling, or leg pain that's new, sudden, one-sided, or getting worse, please get it looked at by a doctor rather than trying to eat your way out of it first. That's not me covering myself. It's genuinely the responsible thing to say to a few million people, some of whom are almost certainly dealing with something that needs more than a beat. For everyday maintenance, though, the shift from convenience food back toward whole plants really does add up over weeks and months. You don't need to overhaul everything tomorrow. Pick 2 or 3 from this list that fit naturally into how you already eat. Maybe that's cooking with more garlic and onions. Maybe it's a daily square of dark leafy greens. Maybe it's swapping your afternoon snack for a handful of berries. And build from there. Consistency across months matters far more than trying to do all 20 perfectly for one dramatic week, and then quietly giving up. Drop a comment and tell me which plant on this list surprised you most. Are you starting with beets and turmeric, building a daily ginger tea habit, or looking into Hawthorn for the long game? I read the comments, and this is genuinely one of the better conversations happening on this channel. So don't be shy about asking questions too. If you're not subscribed to Healthy Roots yet, now's a good time, because next week we're going deeper into practical, evidence-based plant knowledge you can actually use in your own kitchen. Take care of your circulation. It's carrying more of your daily life than you probably give it credit for, and it's worth feeding well